Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The Marine Corps has a new plan to grow the force by as much as 5% by 2032. The service hopes adding thousands of Marines will spell success in future wars. One lieutenant general says that goal is a step in the right direction to fix earlier versions of its force design plans. For more about this new goal and more context on changes ahead for the Marine Corps, Federal News Network's reporter Rachel Cohen joins me now. Rachel, it's great to have you on the Federal Drive. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me more about what the Marines are thinking about here and how these changes came about.
Sure. So last week, there was an event at the Center for Strategic and International Studies with Lieutenant General Eric Austin. He's the Deputy Commandant for Combat Development and Integration, among multiple other hats that he wears in acquisition and so on and so forth. So they were having a discussion about what the force needs in the future. You know, what kind of tech, what kind of skills. And, you know, he mentioned service leadership had asked other, senior officials about the possibility of growing 4 to 5%. You know, we think this is what we need. How do we get there? So they launched a 4-month sort of deep dive starting in February, ran from February to May. So just ended. And so that hashed out, what they need to do to get there. And so Austin said they had 18,000 proposals for ways that they could grow. Everybody has their idea, and they had to whittle that down to 9,000. And so those 9,000 line items or initiatives or, what have you, that comprises what the growth will be. So their goal is initially 4% growth between 2028 and 2031. And then if they want to tack on another 1%, they can add that by 2032.
So 5% really isn't a lot of extra Marines. Where will they leverage that to get the most value? How does it make a difference?
So I think in a few ways. Austin said it addresses parts of the earlier force design effort that ended up not giving the Marines enough of the capabilities they think they need in the future. So it's kind of course correcting for that. A spokesman told me it's not just a few areas that need help. These thousands of new Marines would handle missions, that kind of run the gamut, right? So from intel, targeting, maintenance, it's usually not a problem of having too many people in the services, right? So they would staff up, kind of across the board. It could also help them integrate new things into the force, like attack drones, little quadcopters and such, that they're really racing to get out to the front lines. And the Marines are really trying to lean into that. So, it could help them, stand up new units to do things like that. They didn't actually provide any details about what is in those 9,000 items for growth. That's for a future budget cycle to, come out publicly, I think. And so, you're right. It's not a huge number, but, I think, several thousand is nothing to sneeze at, especially because they've been downsizing for the last several years.
And it would then kind of be a peanut butter spread, is one of DoD's favorite analogies. They just spread them evenly across the whole force then.
Sure. I'm not sure if it would be, hey, we have, a shortage of 1,000 maintainers or something, and so most of them will go here, or, we only need 50 extra, people in this area. I don't know, proportionally how it would shake out, but, it sounds like there's need kind of everywhere.
What would the Marines have to do to make this a reality? Would they increase recruiting or, build their advertising budget? What would they do?
Sure. So they're already talking to the Office of the Secretary of Defense and lawmakers on the Hill about how to make it work, right? You want to bring more people in, you want to pay them, you have to have, a larger budget ostensibly. So they're looking to start working on that goal in fiscal 28. So now is, the time when they start building those plans. They're also asking for more personnel in 2027, so the upcoming fiscal year as well. So they need to secure funding for what they want to do and have a plan for what those Marines would do once they've joined. It could be that they see an opportunity in the larger defense spending bills that we've had to put that money toward things that sometimes get kicked down lower, right? More people that they don't always have the dollars for. So yeah, we'll see, I would guess, an uptick in recruitment. They're hitting their numbers so far this year. So, they might think, hey, yeah, we can ride that, for another few years.
And how does this fit into the Marine Corps' broader force design effort?
Yeah, so force design is this major overhaul that started in 2020 of how the service wants to go to war in the future. It was initially tailored toward a conflict with China in the Pacific, conflict that is more dispersed, more issues like signal jamming, more reliance on drones instead of, just sheer, human manpower, things like that. So, but they tweak it periodically to keep up with what's happening in the real world, and this is the latest iteration of that. And so, Austin said there's been some bumps and bruises along the way as they've figured out, how to get force design from, what he said was 60 or 70% of the way there to, something that they're more comfortable with, something that they think, more accurately meets their future needs. And he said, it's really a case study in change management. Learning to iterate has been good for the Marines.
So the first real test of the viability of this notion will be to see if anything shows up in the 2027 appropriations for it? I
think maybe a little bit after that, right? Because the 27 budget is already going through on the Hill. I think they'll start tweaking certain initiatives that are already in the 27 budget, maybe turning those, maybe ratcheting up things that they didn't think that they would have the money for, tweaking their recruitment projections, things like that. But, it sounds like at this point, the bulk of that effort, it'll start in 28, but, the stepping stones to that will be in 27, and they can always reprogram money throughout the year, right? You say, I need, I don't know, pick a number, $10 million, to go toward this personnel thing instead of, that training thing. So, it's entirely possible that we could see that. But, I think in large part, we would see it as part of the 28 rollout, but the services have to go through their fights about who gets what piece of the pie and, what OSD likes and what OSD doesn't like. And, all of that happens every year as they plan for future years.
That's Federal News Network's Rachel Cohen. Rachel, thanks for joining me today. And thanks for giving us an early look at this initiative.
Yeah. Thanks, Terry.
You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com.